I think we're off and running. Hey everyone, my name is Emily and I'm the community manager here on Diabetes, working with Diabetes Hands Foundation. And we are just 2 days away from Thanksgiving. How exciting! And one thing that some of us hear sometimes at Thanksgiving, depending on who we're sharing our meal with, is you can't eat that. And that kind of phrase is exactly what we're here to talk about today. That's a blood boiler for some of us. We're here today for a live interview with Jane K. Dickinson to talk about research that she's doing on language and diabetes. Jane, camera's on you. Please start by telling us who you are.
Hello, I'm Jane Dickinson, and I'm a nurse and certified diabetes educator. I have had type 1 diabetes for 40 years as of June, and I've been a CDE since 1996. So that's who I am. I actually got my start in diabetes education at diabetes camp back in New England. And I had a long-standing relationship with diabetes camp in Massachusetts. I was a camper as a child and a counselor as a teenager, and then I was a student nurse and then a camp nurse. And then I became the clinical director. And so I was working there year-round. And I loved camp. In fact, there was a new video from our camp on Facebook today, and I got all verklempt. So, but anyway,
I'm so jealous because I have spoken with so many people who said I had this amazing camp experience. I went to a camp full of kids who had diabetes, and it was incredible. And every year, I just look forward to it all year round. I myself had a terrible diabetes camp experience.
Oh no! And that happens.
Different camps, and I don't know if I was maybe I was a little too young, and I don't know, but man, I hated those camps.
You know what's funny? When I was a camper, I was 8 and 9, and it was a whole different ball game back then in the mid 70s. And we checked our urine, first void, second void. We were at camp to learn how to give our shots. Like, that's why you got sent to camp. And
and why I went to camp. Yeah.
If you happen to have fun, you were lucky, but you were there to learn. So now, and also you had to eat every speck of food that was on your plate. And I may have mentioned in past conversations that I, to this day, cannot eat butter and peanut butter together because I was forced to eat it together at camp. Because, very high fat diets and So
I find that very strange. You and I, it actually sounds like we went to the same camp. Went to camp to learn how to do injections. Yep. And so exactly, if you managed to have some fun, that was kind of weird. And you had to eat all of the food, and I was a terribly picky eater as a kid. And cottage cheese, I'll tell you, There was no way. There was just no way.
Yes, and of course cottage cheese would be a staple food at camp because it's high fat. I mean, if it's the real whole fat cottage cheese. Anyway, but camp now is a completely different world. Food is healthy yet kid-friendly. And as I'm told by my camp RD friends, all food is kid-friendly. They eat what you put in front of them. But what I'm saying is they make healthy food fun and delicious. It's not like being force-fed stewed tomatoes and pats of butter and whatever else we had to eat. So, So that was my start, like I said, and then I moved to Colorado in 1998, and I started an outpatient hospital-based diabetes education program, and I ran that and provided diabetes education for people with type 1 and type 2, and by the way, camp was strictly type 1. And so provided education for people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes for 12 years, and that was at our local small rural resort town hospital in Steamboat Springs. And then in 2011, I took a full-time job working remotely for Columbia University, specifically Teachers College, which is their graduate school of education. And so I now oversee and teach in a solely online Master of Science in Diabetes Education and Management. So that has given me the opportunity to start my research program, which I've been really anxious to get started for several years. I've been interested in the language of diabetes for at least 2 decades. It was in 1993 that I first gave a talk for pediatric nurses at Yale New Haven Hospital. It was an in-service for the school age unit, about resisting the urge to label patients as their disease. So I was coming from the diabetes angle, but it really went across the board. I mean, nurses and physicians and all sorts of healthcare providers in the hospital have a tendency to call people by their diagnosis, or why they're in the hospital. So you might have an appy in room 12, which would be someone who has appendicitis, or you might have a sickler in room 14, which is someone with sickle cell disease, or you might have a diabetic or an asthmatic, or, you know, although interestingly enough, no one ever calls someone with cancer a cancerous, but that doesn't happen. But anyway, but we do hear leukemics and, you know, kids with cystic fibrosis were often called cystics. And so it really bugged me. It got under my skin as I was working in that environment. I was working on my nursing degree back then. And so anyway, I gave an in-service. And about 2 years ago, I came across my notes from that talk. And I was just devastated that things haven't really changed. And that it had been 20 years since I gave that talk. And you still see and hear this very negative labeling language out there. So moving along, in about 1995, when I became the clinical director at the camp, the nonprofit back in Massachusetts, we kind of did a sweeping language adjustment, and we eliminated the word diabetic at camp. We didn't refer to ourselves or campers or anyone else as diabetics. We started calling, you know, kids with diabetes, people who live with diabetes, and so forth, because we didn't want to put the disease first, and we didn't want to make it all about diabetes, like that's the most important thing about someone. And we wanted kids to feel like kids first, and that there's so much more really important things about them as people, and that we were going to, you know, acknowledge that. We also eliminated the word test. And we started saying BGM, which was blood glucose monitoring, BGM and insulins, BGM and insulins. And one of the reasons for that is that we didn't want kids to have this mindset that checking their blood glucose was a test, that it was a pass fail or a good bad, or that there was any kind of grade or, you know, judgment attached to that. And so we wanted the kids to know across the board that every number is a good number because it's information that we can work with. And so in the process of getting rid of the word test, we also got rid of good and bad, obviously. Maybe not obviously, but we did as well. And I like to tell the story about the camper that I was working with one time when we were doing BGM and insulins. We were outside her cabin, and I called her name and she didn't appear. And so I called her name again, and someone said, she's in the cabin. And I said, well, why is she in the cabin? And they said, she doesn't want to tell anyone her blood sugar. And so I went into the cabin and found her, and I said, what's going on? And she said, my blood sugar's high, or my blood sugar's bad, or something like that, some kind of judgment on herself. And her blood sugar was, I don't know, in the 200s or something. And I've never forgotten that scenario where this 13-ish year old girl was so ashamed to tell the nurse and her cabin mates that her blood sugar was in the 200s. And I just thought, what was her experience that led her to that? And so anyway, and so obviously it's about the messages that we send, but we send messages through words. So interestingly enough, as I was preparing for this talk, I realized I don't think I ever heard the word non-compliant or the word control back in those days. I honestly don't remember hearing those, or else they maybe didn't affect me back then like they do now. Now I have a tick whenever I hear them. But in 1993, the results of the DCCT were published, and that stands for Diabetes Control and Complications Trial. And I truly believe that because that was a landmark study and that was a turning point in diabetes management, that the word control took hold at that point, because it was intensive control versus, what's the other one? I can't think of it. You know, the everyday control, whatever the other one was. And
what I have.
What's that? Oh. But it became about intensive control from that point going forward. And then we added good control, bad control, good control, poor control, uncontrolled, well controlled. And so I really think that that's when that happened, when that word was introduced. So as I said a minute ago, words send messages, and messages can be labels, and they can be judgments. And those were kind of the two themes that I was seeing. And 2 weeks ago, Susan Guzman gave a live interview, and her work is phenomenal and is definitely aligned with what I'm doing as well. And she talks a lot about stigma, and stigma is another message that our words send very often. And then finally, and not finally, because people are catching on to this all over the place, and not just in diabetes. I'm seeing, new wording in weight-related terminology. And as I'm reading the literature, I'm seeing more and more, and it's very heartening to see that people are adjusting their language slowly but surely. But at the Diabetes Mind Innovation Summit this past Friday, one of our very own two diabetes people, Brian, said it's time to change the conversation. And I think there's no better way to say it than that. So I hope that we can change that conversation from a message of judgment and labeling to one of empowerment, from one of stigma to strength. And that we can change our words by doing that, from negative words to positive words. And I think that, as you'll see when I get into the results of my study, that allows room for hope. And yes, so you ready for me to jump in?
That is. I just have to jump in to see how powerful that is. Okay. Oh, good. There are more leaves out there. I have to say that I've been feeling like what people with diabetes do is impressive. We have these challenges that people who don't have diabetes don't face, and we have extra challenges when we get up in the morning compared to our peers who do not have diabetes, and we should be admired and recognized for facing those challenges each day. Everyone with diabetes, with any kind of diabetes. And so I love that you just said changing that conversation and changing the language from stigma and shame into something that's empowering. And I would want to add to that the word pride. Okay. Since we're talking about words, I want the word pride in our discourse.
Awesome. I love that.
All right. Let's talk about your research.
Okay, so the official formal name of my study is the experience and evaluation of diabetes-related language in diabetes care. I actually had to look that up because I didn't even remember that it was that long and crazy. But so this is a study that I conducted this year, and it included 2 virtual focus groups and 2 in-person focus groups. My study was approved by the Institutional Review Board at Teachers College, Columbia University. And I want to start by explaining that there were a few challenges with this study. And the first one was that I did not receive funding. I had tried to get funding for the study, did not get it. And so I was kind of on my own. But the second one was that the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, which is kind of like an ethics board, a human subjects board, they make sure that we researchers treat humans well in research. They did not have any or much experience with virtual focus groups. Well, neither did I. And I tried to find information on it, and there was very, very little available, especially in the setting that I was proposing, which was tudiabetes, which is a chat, an online web-based live chat, and DSMA, which is a live Twitter chat. So no information on doing those kinds of, that I could find, those kinds of focus groups. So as you can imagine, the IRB had even less of a background in this. And so they really wanted me to use a consent that was geared toward an in-person focus group. So that created a challenge for me because I had to figure out how to let potential participants see the consent beforehand. So I ended up posting it on my website. I don't know if people actually went and looked at it or not. I probably wouldn't have. Those are long and boring, right? And in the actual chats, I had to have people type in the full, I have read, understand, and consent to blah, 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 even though they may not have read it. But the IRB was insistent that I had to have that in order to include participants. And then in-person focus group recruitment was really tough for me because I had a contact at our local newspaper who is a great guy. He has type 1 himself, and he had told me that he would run an article about the study, and that never came together. It never happened. So I ended up having to call people, and that was just, that's not ideal for a focus group. And so I didn't, that was a challenge. So, but moving on to the first virtual focus group, which was back in March, and that was here on 2 Diabetes. And I have to say, and I'm not saying this because I'm here talking to you right now, but it was definitely the easiest of the 4 for several reasons. First of all, Emily, because you made it easy. Emily did all the promotion, and she set it up, and she did all the hard stuff behind the scenes. So all I had to do was show up. And, you know, people are engaged in the 2 Diabetes community. So we had active, you know, participants. And we had a manageable number, but we had a great number. We had 19 people who gave consent, and we had a fabulous discussion. And also I was live like I am now. So I was following the chat in the feed, and I could ask follow-up questions if there was anything that, you know, well, what do you mean by that? Or how do you feel when you hear that word? And so I was able to do that. I didn't need to do it a lot, but a few times. So, so that was great. The Twitter chat was also great, but there were some challenges with that one. Certainly having only 140 characters is a challenge in a focus group. You know, I mean, think about a live in-person focus group where people just go on and can. Then think about a live chat like 2 Diabetes where people could type as much as they want and do. Twitter, you've got 140 characters. Now, the good thing is that people who are engaged in DSMA are used to that, and so they're pretty good at being concise and writing brief responses, but it's hard to say, like, if anything was lost in the research data because of that. Consent was also an issue on Twitter, because on 2 Diabetes, I could kind of read my explanation or speak my explanation of the study. On Twitter, we had to give the explanation of the study in like 10 140 character blurbs. And, you know, this study is about blah. This, you will be asked blah, you know, so that was tough. And then the consent, again, was kind of like, you know, I'm saying in the consent that your responses will be kept confidential. Well, Twitter is about the least confidential thing on the face of the earth, even though it's not on the face of the earth, in the universe. And so people actually questioned that. They were like, what are you talking about confidential? This isn't confidential. And I'm thinking, this is the consent I had to use, you know? And what I tried to explain was that when I'm reporting the results, I won't use any names or Twitter handles, and then it will be confidential. But anyway, I'd be curious to know if there were people lurking out in Twitter looking at these posts like, what? But anyway, well, we had a great group. We had 40 people who consented to the study. And, you know, in a live focus group, in an in-person focus group, that would have been overwhelming because you wouldn't be able to manage that very well. They say like 8 to 12 is the ideal number. But on Twitter, you know, people are just typing all the time and things are coming up and they're going off of each other, and it's a conversation, and then I get the transcripts later, so it doesn't matter how many, you know, tweets there are. The retweets, favorites, and responses were somewhat challenging when it came time to analyze the results, because in a in-person focus group, you actually look at facial expressions, body language, responses to each other, things like that, like the interactions of the people. Whereas in a Twitter chat, I kind of feel like that's what the retweets and favorites and responses are. They're like saying, yes, I agree with that. But then do I count that as somebody who's saying control bugs them? Or do I count that as it's just a support, like, yes, I think, I agree with what you said or whatever. So that made it a little challenging with the analysis. And then side conversations are definitely, happen a lot on Twitter in a Twitter chat. And so that's not a problem at all. It's just, it made for more transcript material to get through as these little side conversations that were going on. And I talked about confidentiality already. So, and then the in-person focus groups, I had 2. We had very small numbers. I had 4 people at one and 5 at the other. Some people forgot, some people had conflicts come up. And what ended up happening with the in-person focus groups was that it really turned into more of a support group than a focus group. And it was very interesting to me. This could be like a separate publication, because the difference between the virtual ones and the in-person ones. And I think that the people on tudiabetes and the people on DSMA know each other. They're engaged. They're used to that environment, and they feel very comfortable, discussing what their thoughts and their feedback. Whereas this group, and I guess in focus groups, they're not supposed to know each other, but these groups did not know each other. They had trouble staying focused on the questions. They didn't really understand the questions, and it was kind of like pulling teeth to, try to help them answer the questions. And I wonder if part of it was because I was the only diabetes educator in this town for 12 years. And so at some point in all of these people's lives, I had worked with them. And maybe, quite honestly, they weren't comfortable talking to me about their feelings about words. Or better yet, maybe I was so amazing with my language that they had no problems. I don't know. That's my theory. Anyway, but they did actually, in their own way, they did give consistent responses, or responses that were consistent with what the people in the 2 virtual focus groups said, just not as much volume. So, anything so far? That's kind of my description of the focus groups.
Well, we have in the chat room, we have some folks talking about language that they've tried to change for themselves. Like, for example, changing the use of the word test,
Yep.
test blood sugar. That I think a lot of folks, especially folks who have had diabetes since a young age, grew up saying test blood sugar, just because that was how it was referred to.
Yep.
At the time. I'm one of those folks. That's how I've always referred to it, and I've made an effort to change to checking blood sugar. And also folks referring to themselves as diabetics. I think that's another one that a lot of folks just grew up with, like, I'm a diabetic, and that's how
Yep.
you convey that idea. And one thing that people have noticed in the chat room is that when you're really used to using that language, even as a person with diabetes, it can be really hard to change.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
to me, then it's interesting to think about, we may want, and I think we'll get to this further in your talk, we may want providers and healthcare teams to change some of the language that they use, and we're recognizing whoever you are, it can be really hard to change language.
It absolutely is, and I do recognize that at every turn, because we say and we write what we hear and what we know, and it's all around us. It's everywhere, especially in healthcare. If you walked into a hospital, you would hear all of these words all the time, and so it's very foreign to someone to say, well, we don't use tests anymore. What are you talking about? We don't use tests. It is a test, or whatever. What was I going to say? I actually, on Friday, it dawned on me why we call it a test. And I mean, we call, A1C a test. We say blood tests. We say, that's just what we say. But there was a picture on one of the slides of Clinitest. Hello. And there was a test tube, and I was like, well, of course we call it a test. We were using a test tube, and we were putting Clinitest tablets into it, and then it became test tape. And then, I don't know, did you ever use test tape? That stuff you could pee on, and it would turn colors. It was like the portable.
I did.
The portable testing kit.
I used Clinitest, but I don't remember the tape. I might have been too young to remember it as well.
Well, as I recall, we used that when we were traveling once because I think my parents literally didn't bring the whole kit with us, and so they went and they found this test tape stuff, and then it became a blood test. And so I mean, the history of words is just as fascinating as the transition to new words. Trust me. And so anyway, I totally get that. It's very hard. So. Anything else before I start talking about results?
Looking in the chat room. Yeah, people are discussing the word control, and someone in the chat room, Marie in the chat room, said that she recently at a provider's office saw on a medical chart the question, "Are you controlled?" Which
how's your control?
Generally just seems like such a weird, vague question. So this is something, obviously, the use of words, the kind of words that we choose and that our medical providers choose, is a really fascinating topic.
Yeah.
Let's go on with what you found.
Okay, so question 1, there were 6 questions that I asked each of the focus groups. And question 1 was, what diabetes-related words have a negative impact on you? And there were 7 themes that emerged from the answers to that question. And so the words that people gave fell into 7 categories. The first one is judgment, and then fear and anxiety. The third one is labels, reminders, and assumptions. The fourth one is oversimplification, and then directives. And the 6th one is misunderstanding, misinformation, and disconnection. And the 7th theme or category is actually body language and tone, which are not words, but the point is that those have an effect as well. So question number 2 is, how do you feel when you hear those words? So people reported that words like non-compliant or compliant and control and uncontrolled make participants feel judged. And they can elicit feelings of anger. They feel insulted, belittled, misunderstood, rebellious, annoyed, defeated, and frustrated. And so those were the biggest words in the judgment category, but there were others as well. But non-compliant, compliant, control, uncontrolled, or poor control, or lack of control, or, you know. And then in the fear and anxiety category were words like complications, blindness, cataracts, DKA, and ketones. And people said that these words made them feel, or make them feel, scared, sad, ashamed, alienated, worried, doomed, depressed, and guilty. So you can see there's overlap with judgment there, but that was mainly words that were related to acute and chronic complications, and those induce fear and anxiety. And then the category labels, reminders, and assumptions. So under labels, people reported words like diabetic, disease, brittle, postmenopausal diabetic, and special needs. Under reminders, some of the words that were identified were diabetes, food, death, diet, chronic, insulin dependent, weight, and risk. And then assumptions were things like suffer, and all people with diabetes are fat. So people reported that they feel offended when they hear labels, reminders, and assumptions, and that it's annoying and frustrating. And they called it a cop-out, impersonal, demeaning, and patronizing. And so basically hearing reminders about the demands and dangers involved in diabetes, or simply that they have diabetes, gets tiring. And then the category words that oversimplify or minimize how hard diabetes is can make people feel dismissed. And those examples were, you'll get used to it, just, should, lose weight, at least it's not. Directives, or words that tell people what to do, make focus group participants feel cranky, upset, hurt, and, quote, like a failure with no self-control, end quote. And some people have a constant thought of getting caught. Others lose interest when they hear those words. And some examples are lose weight, exercise more, you should, you shouldn't, can't, or can you eat that, or you can't eat that, no, stop, not allowed to, and don't. So those fell in that directives category. And then comments based on misconceptions are frustrating and can lead to feeling defensive, impatient, or even angry. Comments and questions from healthcare providers that indicate a disconnection. So this is the category misunderstanding, misinformation, or disconnection. So when healthcare providers make comments or ask questions that indicate they're disconnected or have a lack of knowing the patient, makes participants feel annoyed, exasperated, and irritated. They reported feeling tired, resigned, and not respected. So examples were cure, reverse, have you tried, you're fine, normal, dead pancreas, you don't look fat, the bad kind. And then, are you still using insulin? Have you checked your sugar recently? So those were examples of either misconceptions, misunderstanding, misinformation, or basically a disconnection with the person. And then finally, body language and tone. Participants reported that how things are said can be just as hurtful as what is said, and that body language and tone can send messages that are patronizing, impersonal, and accusatory. And someone wrote, I felt, quote, I felt like a lot of it was my fault, quote. Either wrote or said. Sorry, so I should say reported. Question number 3 was, what particular experiences do you recall that involved words and diabetes? And the 3 themes that came up for this question were the general public, so basically all the time, everywhere, healthcare providers, and the media. But there was a qualification that came up in all the focus groups, I'm pretty sure, that acknowledged throughout that people do care, but that they are often misinformed, and that hurtful words and phrases are often used because that is what people hear and what they know. And so I just put that in there, that it was acknowledged that people mean well, and that very often they're using these words and these phrases because it's all they ever heard, or they're questioning or directing or I guess judging because they care or they're nervous or whatever. So the general public, basically the theme there was food police, and that questions and comments about food are everywhere. And somebody responded, nobody ever asks, should you be eating those carrots? And then somebody else said, just in general, to the where do you have these experiences of words and diabetes, and this was under general public. This person said, to be honest, I don't know how to answer this. Unless someone is talking about how awesome I am in dealing with it, it's usually bad. So while that was a funny response in a way, it's actually very sobering that this person usually gets, bad commentary. And then healthcare providers or healthcare visits. The theme in this one was seeing uncontrolled in the health record. I actually thought prior to this study that I was the only person who'd ever seen that in my record. And it actually wasn't that long ago. And I said something to my provider about it, and he said he would remove it. I don't know if he did, but I was so taken aback by seeing that in my chart that I still am reeling from it. But someone wrote, honestly, it hurt my feelings. I was disappointed in my endo for labeling me as uncontrolled. Another person wrote, A1C is 6.1 and I'm still uncontrolled. And finally, someone wrote, I've always felt like I'm the only one who can judge my own feelings of control. So you've got label and you've got judgment. And you've got disconnection. I mean, 6.1 is uncontrolled. Okay. And then in the media, negative words are used in print, broadcast, and social media. We see it everywhere. We hear it everywhere. And these words can spread misconceptions, stigma, or simply bad information about diabetes and the people who live with it. So this was, I like all of the examples, but this quote was kind of funny. It said, hey, you know what I saw on the news about diabetes? Insta cringe. So they were just saying that they, they hear that all the time. Hey, call you up. Guess what? You're going to be cured next weekend.
Hey, doesn't that sound good?
Yeah. And again, it's for good, they care. It's because they care and they're excited. All right. So anything to this point, or you want me to?
In the chat room, we have a lot of people sort of ahhing and nodding along with what you're saying, folks who have heard a lot of these words, who really relate to the responses that you got around these sort of categories of words. And I had a thought about what you were saying around people recognizing that there are folks who really mean well and say things that are still either uninformed, hurtful, unintentionally hurtful, frustrating in whatever way. Because I feel like it's really hard, especially when you know somebody means well, at least for me, it can be really hard to say, I really don't like the way that you said that, or you don't really want to call someone out in any way that's going to make them feel badly if you know that they didn't mean to make you feel badly.
Right.
So this one to me seems especially challenging. Is a loved one at say Thanksgiving maybe asking should you be eating that, and maybe they're trying to help, but
so you slip them a copy of my book.
I slip them a copy of your book. Well, my first reaction would be, I want to kick them under the table, but it's a loved one, and they didn't mean to make me angry.
I know.
So maybe after you finish with the results, we could talk about some of the ways to address some of this language when we hear it.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. And I do want to share that my goal in life, and with this one wild, precious life that we have, what are we going to do? I just heard that quote. My hope is that somewhere, somehow down the road, people won't hear these words. And whether that starts with healthcare professionals or whether that starts with us, the people living with diabetes, whether that starts with TV, that's never going to happen. But you know what I mean? Like wherever it starts, that the next 7-year-old who's diagnosed will never hear these words. And then they'll move up through their generation not saying those words and not hearing those words, and then it's a non-issue. So, all right, so questions 4 and 5 were a little bit redundant, and you learn these things as you're doing your research. But they basically asked if you could ask your diabetes care professionals to stop using one word or more, what would it be? And the 3 themes that came out of that were stop judging, stop labeling, and stop discussing complications. So in the stop judging category, participants basically said stop using words, phrases, body language, and tone that are judgmental, condescending, or lack investment in the person as an individual. And an example was, quote, they need to drop the judgment quality to their appointments. They also said to remove words that impart fault or guilt. And those words identified were should, control, stop, and can't. I mean, if you think about all 4 of those words, they're not empowering. They're not strength building. They're don't should on me. I actually had a dermatology appointment where the dermatologist, it was actually a PA, not that matters. And she said, do you use moisturizing cream? And I said, no. Well, you should, she said. Well, you should. And I said, or she said, you should use moisturizing cream. And I said, don't should on me. And she said, well, you should.
She didn't get it.
No. The nurse in the room got it, though. Anyway, whoops. I got to go back for 1 second. So an example of a response was, quote, sigh, control. I think that's just an illusion. So the second category was no, it wasn't. Stop judging. Did I skip one? Stop labeling. Oh, okay, next. I have stop judging, and then I have stop discussing complications. Hearing about complications is scary and stressful. People said it gets old and tiring to hear about them every time. And the sample response was, quote, I don't want to hear about the complications at every visit. I totally heard it the first time. So, and that's another one of those ones that'll be tough for healthcare professionals, because the reason we manage diabetes is to avoid complications. So how do you teach and guide and support people without focusing on complications? And so we have to kind of be gentle about how to teach providers in that category. Question number 6 was, how do you think not hearing those words would affect your diabetes experience? And there were 3 themes here as well, and they are suggestions for healthcare providers. These words will be replaced with other words. And if healthcare providers stopped using these words, ... So the first category is suggestions for healthcare providers. Respondents said, or participants said, listen and focus on the person. Treat people with diabetes like humans, partners, and competent. Acknowledge that diabetes is hard work. Take an interest in what is going on for the individual, and do not blame. And some sample responses were, quote, I think saying, what can I help you with first might be helpful, instead of hand over the goods, then question where you went wrong. Another one was, all in caps, words matter. And then finally, quote, focus on the person, not the diagnosis. You'll treat both more effectively that way. The second category was, these words will be replaced with other words, which scares me to death. But basically what that means is that the bigger problem is the messages that these words represent, and the messages that are sent to people with diabetes and to the general public. And so until we turn around the mindset that causes people to send these messages and to use these words, the people who brought this point up are probably right. We'll just think of other words that we can use that make people feel down or bad about themselves or whatever. So the quote was, whatever words we use to replace the problem words will grow to associate with the same issues. And I would add, unless we change or solve those issues. And then also, healthcare providers can take a different approach to working with people who have diabetes, and maybe positive, empowering words will follow. So there was a great quote about this as well, which was, I'd rather see a paradigm shift to one of recognizing and respecting that I'm doing very well in managing my self-care, that my doctor should be on my team in helping me take care of myself. And then finally, if healthcare providers stopped using these words, people reported they would feel respected, listened to, that healthcare providers really care. They would feel relieved, supported, and comfortable. And somebody said, like, maybe I don't have a chronic disease every second of my life. People reported that they would feel trust. And the quote was, I would have faith in my healthcare providers if they didn't use words that I think convey a lack of information, sensitivity, or understanding of my experience. And they said they would feel more confident and willing to work with those healthcare providers. And the quote was, I'm much more willing to work with people who are willing to work with me. If you can't see my humanity, get out. They said they would feel more like a partner or team and less scared. And a sample response was, could get to meaningful conversation more quickly with less emotional obstacles and baggage. They also said it would reduce stress, anxiety, anger, and defensiveness. They'd feel less judged. And the quote was, better language would help shift the shame, blame, and self-loathing from the person to the disease, allows for hope. And then finally, less medical stigma. And the quote was, getting rid of stigmatized language would help me feel like a human being first, and it would help me feel like I'm seen as one. So in conclusion, and I've only said this about 12 times so far today, but messages of understanding and hope, rather than negative judgmental words and labeling judgmental messages, will help to people to feel empowered and feel better about their situation. And so I would close with one last quote, and that was, I would feel less judged, less ashamed, less helpless, less annoyed, less defensive, less angry, and more likely to be happier. So my final question, which is really my next research question, is, could this improve blood glucose levels?
Right. Is this actually not just about whether I'm frustrated or angry or scared, but does it actually also translate, not that those things aren't important because they are, but does it also translate into health outcomes? It's a really interesting question. So are you planning that research, that next piece?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I hope we can be involved here on 2 Diabetes.
I hope so too.
Awesome. Awesome. So one of the things that we talked about earlier for just a moment is, what do we do about this? And what to do isn't part of the research study that you just did, because you were assessing the current situation and how people feel, not working on what people think we should do about the feelings. Right. But I'm sure that in the course of the research, you had to have some ideas about how to handle this. I mean, you mentioned that if the words are replaced with other words without the actual underlying message or attitude changing, then those other words will gain negative connotations as well, right? That it can't be changing one blamey word for a different blamey word. The person saying the word needs to understand that this is not, that blame is inappropriate, that this person hasn't earned blame, and that blaming someone for their condition is not right.
Right.
So how do you think we tackle that?
I think there are several approaches that we can and would benefit from taking. See how I avoided saying should there? I think that as people with diabetes, we can do some things right out of the gate. We can approach diabetes management as a set of choices and not a set of dictates and rules, and that we can share that with other people. So when somebody says, "Can you eat that?" instead of saying ever, "I can't eat that, I have diabetes," or whatever, we say, "I don't eat that." That's something that I wrote about in my book, and it was on a slide at the Innovation Summit as well. I was so psyched to see that, and it makes a huge difference. It makes a difference in the message that it sends, and it makes a difference in empowerment. When I say, "Oh no, I don't eat that," or "I don't want that," then that is so different than "I can't have that." That's, so it's a different approach, and we can do that. We can also explain, what was it at Susan's talk? It came up, if the number shows up on your meter, that's, out of your own target range where you don't want it or whatever, and someone says, "Oh my gosh, why are you so high? What did you do?" To have a ready answer, something as simple as, "That's diabetes." I love that. That came up 2 weeks ago. I was like, that is perfect. That's diabetes right there. You see that number?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This number indicates that I might have diabetes.
Yeah. I think that with healthcare professionals, it's tricky. I think we have to remind people constantly that there are a lot of factors involved in diabetes. It's not straightforward. It's not straightforward for anyone. And if someone ever says something about, what do they say? Complicated or uncomplicated diabetes. Have you ever seen that in a chart? Uncomplicated. It's like everybody's diabetes is complicated. Diabetes is a complicated disease. And so, and there's so many factors. There's so many factors involved with why we get it, why we, everything, how we manage it, what our A1C is, and so, so I think explaining to healthcare providers that using a word like non-compliant means that we're not looking at the whole picture. All we're doing is saying they're not doing what I want. They're not, because compliance is about doing what somebody else wants. So we have to change our mentality and our approach to what works for the person. What are they able to do? What are they capable of doing? What are their resources? What is their current situation? And that leads me to, at the opening, and I don't know if there are any healthcare professionals watching today, but at the opening of every visit, I would hope that the healthcare professional would start with asking how the person is doing, asking how well, and actually on Facebook the other day, the source of all information, there was a video about a teacher who starts every day taking each kid up to the front of the class and complimenting them. he spends like I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute complimenting over and over, like different things about the kid. You are brave, you are strong, you're fast, you're a great soccer player, you did a great job on your test yesterday, you're a good student. And he said that all the students started complimenting each other and they started feeling better about themselves. And I thought, what if healthcare professionals started every diabetes visit like that? With a compliment, even if it's, I'm so impressed that you're here. You know, thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for bringing your meter. Thank you. Like, who cares what the numbers are, but thank you for having the numbers here. Or if they say, you know what, I didn't bring my meters because I don't check. But thank you for being honest with me. You are a very honest person. That's awesome. You know, there's always something that you could say. So those are some of the things that come to mind immediately for me.
I think those are fantastic. In the chat room, we had a comment that it would be really useful to come up with some canned phrases that folks who want them could just kind of memorize and use. You know, when somebody says, "Can you eat that?" I already have something that is going to be sort of my automatic response. I don't have to think about it, maybe feel awkward about it, maybe feel like I don't know what to say. I'm frustrated or I'm angry, and so I'm scared to open my mouth. Maybe it'll come out the wrong way or whatever. And this idea came up actually in that talk with Susan Guzman that you referenced earlier.
Could we do that in a discussion?
What now?
Could we do a discussion on 2 diabetes and come up with them together?
I think that would be a great idea. There's another live interview right there. That would be great. Because I think people are taken aback, even though most of us have heard a lot of these sort of phrases and questions like, can you eat that? Are you well controlled? These kinds of things. I think it can still kind of hit you and sort of knock you back a little bit, knock you on your heels. And so by the time you come up with a response, maybe the moment has passed or whatever. We're worried about social awkwardness. And so I think that is a really great idea, Marie, that we come up with some canned responses, that we can just have, some verbiage ready to go for that situation.
And I would just leave everybody with one canned response to the, can you eat that? I mean, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. And then you could add, there are things people with diabetes can't eat. 1, poison. 2, cookies with poison in them. I saw that on Facebook too. But seriously, how awesome is that?
Yeah. Injecting some humor is a wonderful thing. Giving an answer, it's a true answer, which is yes, I can eat this. Mm-hmm. And then a little humor, potentially to smooth what might be an awkward moment for that other person. I think that's great. Yeah. It also makes it more memorable.
That's right. I'll never forget that. Don't feed diabetics poison.
Hey, you said diabetics.
There were quote marks around that.
Oh, okay. Well, Jane, thank you so much for being here today, for doing this really important research. This is really fascinating, and folks in the chat room have really been saying all along that they relate to a lot of what you've been saying, sharing their stories about hearing those words either in doctors' offices or from family and things like that, and how it makes them feel. And so please continue the wonderful work, and thanks for taking some time with us today.
Thank you for letting me do my research here and report it to you all.
Absolutely. And with that, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. You can eat that.
That's right. Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye.